Speak at length about Rod Blagojevich since that day.
All right, thank you so much, Phil Rogers. We know we'll get the reaction from the U.S. Attorney, Patrick Fitzgerald, shortly. Thank you so much. We'll let you break away. Let's go to Tom Glasgow. You have a comment about what Rod Blagojevich had to say?
Just saw why he was convicted.
Oh, let me make a point too. We'll have a picture in just a moment. We can see it in our preview screen.
Sky 5,
yes,
there it is, right there.
Our Sky 5 shot of the car as it makes its way home to the Ravenswood Manor area.
Tom, I don't think your microphone was on there. What did you just say?
You just saw why he was convicted in his post-trial statement. All right, here's a man who's saying that everyone has duped him. Everyone has taken advantage of him. Everybody has led him down the primrose path. Yet he's still intelligent enough to come out with a quote from Kipling and have a relevant, abstract thought towards what he was facing. And this was very carefully put together by someone who's claiming that they are not intelligent enough to piece together this entire crime spree.
What we won't see, Marion, is the apology on camera. He did this in a closed courtroom, and all we have are the words that came out of his mouth. This was a chance for him perhaps to apologize publicly in front of millions of people and forever be captured on videotape. It didn't happen.
No.
But he had that chance prior to being sentenced, and you saw in his impeachment. His impeachment, he didn't testify at all. He made a big statement in front of the Senate, and he never apologized once for what he did. Again, as Ms. Martspinka said, he ended up saying that he was the victim. He ended up saying this throughout the press. From the minute that the U.S. Attorney indicted him, that is the message that he continually got across. He never did this. And then he got on the stand and he attempted to do the same thing again. He testified in this particular situation. And in the federal system, if you testify and the jury finds against you, it's considered obstruction. And it counts towards an aggravation portion of your sentence.
Really, he was his own worst enemy throughout this process. As you mentioned, his first attorney left because he couldn't stop him from talking. And his inability to sort of understand the scope of what was happening seems to have really played against him, even as it related to being more remorseful once he was convicted. And there's really nowhere for it to go. I mean, the writing's on the wall, you're convicted. You should be at that point, am I not correct, trying to affect how much you're going to get in prison.
Just a bit more contrite. But as Judy said, it was all about him from the very beginning. You know, he never once apologized to the people of the state of Illinois for the embarrassment that he caused us, for becoming a joke in the entire United States and internationally.
He did, but he did that in front of Judge Zagel today. You'll read that transcript, and he apologized to the people, to his family, to just about everybody, even to the media. I believe he said, I shouldn't have brought this into the media and made it such an issue. The apology is out there. We don't see it.
Right, but as a practitioner, that's too little too late. I mean, at what point, if you were sitting as a judge, and if the viewers were sitting at home as the judge, you've got kids, people that have kids, that the kid breaks the plant, ends up beating up their little brother, ends up pouring chocolate onto the computer, and then says, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. At what point do you accept the sorry as being true?
Well, he even knew that he was playing his case in front of the media. One of his apologies, I want to apologize for fronting this case in the media, which the judge responded to saying it was immature and viewed it himself as a boxing match. I mean, the entire time, publicly, he was sort of in a bit of a back and forth with the judge. And that doesn't seem to be the smartest thing to do if you're trying to, especially after you're convicted.
Right. And you talked about public perception, which I think is very important. People talked about the public perception of this case, that Blagojevich didn't make anything, and that was the best avenue that he could have gone down. And instead of keeping quiet and not testifying, as he did in the first jury, he decided to testify in the second jury and make sure that people heard him. Now, everybody was clamoring for him to testify. He did choose to testify, but when he testified, you heard from the jurors that he came off as insincere, they didn't believe him, and at points they didn't like him. Do we all feel sympathetic for his kids? Yes, we do. We feel sympathetic for his kids, we feel sympathetic for his family, but who put himself in this situation? And that's what judges have to do.
Well, everybody's calling that a mistake. The jurors called it a mistake. Now, people looking back call it a mistake. Clearly, the judge, I mean, if you say that since he was found guilty, it became obstruction, could call it a mistake.
And tactically, sometimes it's better not to have your client testify as a defense attorney, because instead of weighing the government's story versus your story, then you have the juror sitting in the back weighing the government's story, going, what's true, what's not true, did he do anything wrong? Sometimes that's a more powerful way to present your case than to have your guy testify.
The former governor just made a brief statement with Patty standing next to him and weeping. It was a Rudyard Kipling quote, and then he said he needs to be strong for his family, and he's heading home, we believe, to his family, his daughters, and will be there as that happens. You made an interesting analogy. You compared it to a child breaking a pot or spilling chocolate. One of his quotes to Judge Zagel today was, "It was childish and not productive." He's admitting that he acted like a child through all of this now?
But he did act like a child throughout all this. And, you know, I understand why his first attorney resigned. When you have a client that you will not follow your advice, and his first attorney is a very, very good attorney, when he resigned from the case, you knew something was wrong because there's an issue of client control. You are the attorney. You are the one that's supposed to design and direct the litigation. Instead, I think it was Mr. Blagojevich directing the litigation as to how he perceived that he was supposed to be presented.
So
and I think that was a big mistake.
It wasn't money. It was about that. It was about his first legal team saying, we might not be able to control him the second time around.
Well, and the second time around, you ended up running into several of the same problems that you ran into the first time. And Blagojevich was a loose cannon. You put a guy like that on the stand as a defense attorney, you don't know what's going to come out of his mouth, and they did it. And a lot of times it did backfire. And during the course of the time that he was testifying, Judge Zagel had to redirect him and to make sure that he answered the appropriate questions that were being given to him by the prosecutor.
Now, we're talking about here, it seems to me, as we're listening to all of this, because we've seen now 2 back-to-back governors convicted and sentenced. One of them is actually still sort of hailed somewhat as a hero in some circles because he put the moratorium on the death penalty, and he's even been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. The other one in this case, so much has been discussed about his character and what he thinks of himself and his desiring to be the victim at all times. I mean, throughout all of this, that he's just very self-absorbed. And so that leads to Judy Bart-Topinka's point that perhaps, and here we're looking at a Sky 5 picture, by the way, of Rod Blagojevich making his way home. Can't see him right now, but as we get back to the expressway, you'll be able to, we'll try to follow him once again. This really, it kind of breaks down in this particular case to, if we're going to compare the 2 of them, one that just really was all about him, and that really played against him in this case.
It did, because we, as practitioners, do look at whether or not a certain individual is likable. If they're likable, you can play them to the jury, and then we naturally, as human beings, if you like a person, you're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. You're going to sit there and look at them and go, well, maybe their story's true. If you don't like them, or they come across as pompous or self-absorbed, as you had just mentioned, then people tend to not like that person. And the higher in power a person is, the more self-absorbed they are, the more unlikable that person becomes.
You'll see Rod Blagojevich heading home right here, Sky 5, following Rod Blagojevich and his wife Patty as they head back to their Ravenswood Manor home. We have reporters out there. When we go to his house, and you heard him say he's ready for privacy, he's not going to get that today. He's been sentenced to 14 years in jail. But what we saw a lot outside his home, whether he was going out for a jog, whether he was coming to address the media, support. A lot of supporters embracing him, high-fiving him, shaking his hand. Are they gone now? Will they still be there, you think? I'll be curious to see as he pulls up today whether there will be those who still embrace Rod Blagojevich as their leader, as someone who made a difference for seniors and others.
I will too. And one of the factors that that I've heard over and over again is he didn't make any money. Therefore, since he didn't make any money and he didn't get anything, he didn't commit any crime. And some people have still stuck to that ideal. The jury didn't buy it. And, unfortunately for Mr. Blagojevich, the second jury just simply didn't. You're convicted now. I wonder as well, will you have people that turn him into kind of a cult hero because he's now in jail and turn him into sort of a martyr status because here's somebody who tried to do something for us, didn't really commit a crime, and then move on? People tend to forget. We have a short memory as people and as a society. People look back, and I guarantee you there's very few people that will be able to list off the 18 charges that he was convicted of. And when we go back and think about the egregious nature of him trying to get a job for his wife, a 6-figure job that she wasn't qualified for, getting himself a 6-figure job on a do-nothing board, those tapes that were played over and over and over again, trying to sell a Senate seat, trying to block, keeping sick children from getting the money that they deserved. those are things that we very quickly forget as a society and begin to focus on solely the sentence.
And he does know how. He's a master at manipulating message. I mean, he was a classic politician, one of the best probably that we've seen, in the fact that he knew how to campaign, he knew how to craft message, he knew how to glad hand, and so much of that sort of grassroots politics is what people do tend to embrace. And you're right, we do have very, very, very short memories. Now, we also heard from the jurors. I'm interested in your perspective on the jurors as we watch the car make its way, I'm sure, on the Kennedy there. What are your thoughts on their reaction? Some were surprised, some were not surprised and relieved and felt justified and vindicated. And
they felt sympathetic.
Well, one did, but others felt like he kind of deserved. I mean, it's interesting to hear the differences, though. There's this variety in how
Judy Barr almost
some didn't think they should have as much time.
She almost seemed sympathetic at 14 years. Thought,
she did.
Yeah,
a lot of people are taken aback by the amount of time.
But are we sympathetic for him, or are we sympathetic for his family? And that's where you heard a lot of the jurors talking about, I felt bad for his daughter, I felt bad for his wife. We do as human beings, and it's natural for us to do that. And I feel a great deal of sympathy for Mr. Blagojevich's family. But those jurors, you heard those jurors, as a practitioner, both as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney, I've had jurors that show up and they come to the sentencing and they'll sit and they want to see, well, you know, I was involved. I was the fact finder. I was the person who ended up being part of this 12 that convicted him. We were the ones that were the sole arbiters of the credibility of the witness. When that comes to a sentencing portion, they have a vested interest in what occurs. But most of the jurors that you talk to after a case is over will say it's hard enough to sit in judgment of someone else because you know that there's going to be some form of punishment. Passing the sentence in and of itself, you have to look at the strength of a judicial officer to be able to sit on the bench and see the human element of someone like Blagojevich and his family and know that your actions, taking the actions that you are sworn to by law to uphold, are going to have an effect, repercussions in this family for both the daughters.
It's got to be tougher for a jury to give a sentence than it would be for
Absolutely.
a judge, because a judge is clearly going to be able to see through all the emotion.
And when we had the death penalty, that's what jurors did. Jurors had to pass that death penalty verdict, and they were the ones that were the final arbiters of whether or not a person lived or died.
Tom, let me get our viewers up to speed. Rod Blagojevich sentenced to 14 years in